Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another thing where I talk about things. Today I've been requested to go ahead and talk about webcomics to some extent. I had one or two comments. Well, one comment was like, Greg, you talk about positivity, and so instead of talking about Sinfest and like comics that you I kind of don't approve of, why don't you talk about something positive that you enjoy? And I think they were suggesting like political comics, but I don't really read a whole lot of political comics, although I do read some. I'll talk about them. And then someone else in the last comments, they were like, you should probably just forget the social justice stuff, because if you keep at it for too long, eventually you start to lose perception. Everything becomes like everything starts to look like social justice. You get sort of buried neck deep in the sort of mentality that everyone is fundamentally trying to imply something crazy. And I have seen this. I remember like I was on 4chan and I was in a Steven Universe thread, because Kenza and I have been watching Steven Universe together lately. And somebody posted Steven Universe's girlfriend, the Connie, I think. Connie posted her like as an otaku, and so she had like a body pillow and she was looking really nerdy, and she hadn't shaved her legs. You know, she had hairy legs because she's a lazy nerd. She's like socially inept. She's she's a shut-in. This is Connie as a shut-in nerd. And so somebody got really upset, and they were like, why social justice warriors? Why do you have to ruin everything I love? Like, why do you have to encourage women not to shave your legs? And somebody else was like, dude, the joke is that she doesn't take very good care of herself. It's not a statement promoting hairy legs. It's just her legs are hairy because she doesn't feel like shaving them. So, you know, you start to see that enough on the internet, and sooner or later you start to assume that everything is some kind of implicit statement. Because there are people who do that, where you get like implicit statements, and if you realize what kind of person they are, like they say things that seem kind of cute on the outside, but it turns out that they're really sort of dark and unpleasant when you get down to their actual thought process. But it's true, you don't want to get so wrapped up in that stuff that it eventually just ruins your outlook on the world. You want to be able to see things like an otaku Connie, and then think to yourself like, oh, what a funny otaku picture, as opposed to, why social justice warriors? I bet the social... It's like the... I don't know if you guys have seen the picture of like, there's a guy and he just looks furious at all these Christmas lights that are like tangled up. He's just so pissed. And so somebody, I think they put this on poll on 4chan, where on poll there's a lot of people like at first I think that poll maybe started off and they blamed everything on the Jews because they thought it was funny, because that was the kind of place that 4chan was. It was very kind of like irreverent, and they just sort of did things for like the shock value. But then you started to get people who came in and they didn't like get that it was a joke. And I've seen this quote posted a few times: anyone who gets their jollies by pretending to be an idiot will eventually be surrounded by idiots who think they are in good company. So you had people who came in and they started to believe like, yeah, the Jewish conspiracy, the Jews did this, the Jews did that, and they start to like fight for it really. And so I've seen this image of this guy just looking furious at these Christmas lights and just says, I bet the Jews did this. And it's actually just a really hilarious picture, because it's just so much misdirected anger. I bet the Jews. So I've also seen it done for a couple different groups. But you do start to get in that mentality where you become so focused on this group you don't like, that eventually like your Christmas lights get tangled up and you're just like, oh, that group that is my enemy, I'm so mad at them. If not for them, these Christmas lights wouldn't be tangled up. So that's true, fair point. Well, let's talk about positive things. Let's talk about webcomics that I enjoy, because there are a number of them. I keep up with them. One that somebody suggested, they were like, one good webcomic would be Saturday Morning Breakfast Cereal. And Saturday Morning Breakfast Cereal, actually, it is a very good comic. It's a very popular comic. They update every single day, which is phenomenal. And they tend to do a lot of rather witty humor. And some of it's kind of like they do sociology humor, but it's somewhat highbrow with a mix of lowbrow stuff. Like you know, if you want to combine like a sort of a blue-collar sex joke in with physics, you'll see that there. But they tend not to do like theoretical physics so much as they do like data analysis and stuff like that. They'll do jokes on like studies, you know, or mathematical proofs or things like that, where somebody will use really emotional, stupid logic and apply it to like a mathematical proof, and they'll do it in sort of a fallacious manner, but then they'll have the fallacy will be correct. So like there was a recent one where this kid was like explaining some calculus theorem that he had, where he could like create dogs he could create a puppy out of nothing, and he wanted a puppy, so he created a puppy, and just by making this mathematical theorem. And so this other little girl, she's like, we have to use this discovery carefully. And then the world explodes into dogs, because they can create dogs from nothing, you know. They discovered mathematically how to do this. So there's jokes like that, but there's also jokes about like mortality, death, poverty, life. It's sort of a fun webcomic. It's not any particular thing. It's not focused on any particular thing, but all of them, they're just kind of like fun setup, punchline. You know, you get a chuckle out of it, or you kind of read it and you're like, oh, I understand that, and you have a good time. And I check Saturday morning breakfast cereal just about every day. It's a fun webcomic. I recommend it if you haven't seen it. One that I keep up with that's actually gotten really good, and the artist is good enough, and he's done good writing, that he actually works for mainstream comics now. I believe he's done like a Deadpool comic, and I think he has worked on an Adventure Time comic now. His name is Ryan, I think, the guy who runs Dr. McNinja. But Dr. McNinja, though, Dr. McNinja is a comic that I really love. It's a lot of fun. It's a comic about, it starts off and it's kind of like this guy's just mashed up a bunch of silly ideas. It's a doctor who is also a ninja, and so he goes around wearing like his ninja mask everywhere and a doctor outfit, and his family really just kind of wanted him to be an assassin somewhat, but he wants to be a doctor. And so he's split between his dual nature as a savior and destroyer of lives. And for the most part, he doesn't really, there's not like much medical drama. I mean, like, I think the second issue was him curing a kid with lumberjack disease, which is when you turn into, like, you transform into Paul Bunyan, and then you have a pathological hatred of trees, and so you have to go chop down the forest. And so Dr. McNinja has to rescue this kid with some kind of cure. I can't remember what it was. At some point he gives him an ear piercing, and I remember there being a joke tied into all that. But just all of his scenarios that he goes through, they're all just kind of equally whimsical and fantastic, and they get to be more and more ridiculous as he goes along. Like, he just builds up this very ridiculous society, and it was very reminiscent to me of the Burland role-playing series that my friends and I played, because it just has all these incredibly silly gangs. With, like, for example, one of the mob leaders is called the Robster. And what he is he's like a mutant lobster man. And he's just kind of like, he's just sort of fat and he's sort of silly, but he's got this evil gang and he goes out and he does evil gang things, the Robster. And of course there's also King Radical, who looks a little bit like the Burger King. He looks less like the Burger King now. For a while he was just dressed in an outfit that was like very bright and very kind of stupid looking. He looked like a fast food mascot. And but he changes it though when he gets in some kind of scuffle with like Ronald McDonald or something like that. It was a, whatever parody version of Ronald McDonald. And so then he changes his outfit to be more regal and impressive looking because he doesn't want to be mistaken for a fast food mascot anymore. But King Radical though, King Radical's got this insane plan to sort of make the world more radical and exciting place. But of course his ways of approaching this are very radical unto themselves. And it's a great webcomic just for the absurdity of it, but it follows a good sort of, like, a lot of, like, logical stuff. I mean, like, there's one of Dr. McNinja's sidekicks is a little boy who grew like an amazingly luxurious mustache through sheer force of will. He rides a velociraptors are big. He rides like what is it, Utah raptor? A smaller version of the raptor. He rides a raptor into battle and carries around a pair of revolvers. And his name is Gordito, which basically I think means like fat little boy or something like that. And Gordito is actually like one of the smartest characters probably in the thing, or one of the more practical, down-to-earth characters anyway. He's kind of this straight man, and I can't remember if I think Dr. McNinja named him Gordito, or maybe it was his friend. Like, Gordito was traveling with these guys. Somebody called him Gordito. He had a real name, but somehow he got to be called Gordito, and he never really spoke up to stop it. So that just became his name, just Gordito. And there's also Dr. McLuchador, which came up for a while, rival to Dr. McNinja. He's a luchador, who is also a doctor. And luchadors are another thing that I always thought was really, really kind of just amusing, really interesting. I'm a big fan of El Santo. And so when Dr. McLuchador came up, and it turned out that he was just this really ridiculous, over-the-top doctor. He was more over-the-top than Dr. McNinja, actually, because of all of his medical procedures were incredibly brutal, and they were like just publicity stunts, every single one of them, which fits very well with the sort of pro wrestler mentality. Personally, I've never really been into pro wrestling. Alan's really big on it, but the only thing that I like about pro wrestling are some of the ridiculous things that they do to maintain the illusion. Stuff like where two guys get in a plane crash, and then because one of them, because they were supposed to be bad guy, like it was a bad guy and a good guy, and they weren't supposed to be friendly with each other. So to hide the fact that they were traveling in the same like Cessna airplane together, they had one guy wrestle with like a terrible back injury to sort of make it look like nothing had happened. It was just like, oh yeah, one of us was in, like the guy who was in critical condition obviously didn't have to wrestle, but the guy who could like limp away from the plane had to go and wrestle like that week. Stuff like that. Where there was a wrestler who only spoke Russian. He didn't speak any Russian, but he played a Russian character. He was supposed to be like a Russian bad guy because it was during the Cold War. So because he didn't actually speak any Russian, he just refused to speak to people, period. He had an interpreter who spoke for him exclusively, and he did this for years. Like, he just didn't speak to people, and he just kept up this character all this time. So these kind of things are sort of fascinating about wrestling, but actually watching wrestling is I find it really kind of boring, because they spend so much time sort of catching their energy and setting up for the next thing. And for me, like, I know there's just no intensity for me. Like, when I watch it, I'm like, here we go. I'm gonna wait another, like, minute for them to set up their next thing, you know. It's gonna be like, it's a backflip. Great. You know, I'd rather watch, like, you know, just like, I don't know, I'd rather watch, like consistent stuff, something that's consistently athletic, because pro wrestling, it's like it is very athletic, but so much of it is sort of like they try to work in the soap opera stuff, and I really don't care about this. Like, I really don't get connected to it whatsoever. None of the story, you know, I don't care about pro wrestling story. So if they were like really active, if they were like, this match will last about 5 minutes and we're just going to be nonstop doing like backflips and like all kinds of crazy stuff, pro wrestling would be great. But they don't do that. They spend like a half hour walking around and sort of like, I'm going to slap you. And then the other guy like falls down on the ground really dramatically, and the other guy gets down and he lays on top of him. And if the camera zooms in too close, they'll be like, okay, so what I'm planning to do for this next set is I'm going to pick you up, and then I'm going to like do a backflip, and then you're going to fall over, and yeah. So you hear about that. They set up the spots. That's actually a thing that they do, is they lay over each other and they talk about what they're going to do next. And so that's where like you find a bunch of the delays are at, with them just kind of like laying around, and they're like talking to each other about like, okay, here's what I'm going to do, get ready, and stuff like that. So they're sort of setting up as they go along. I find it very boring to watch. But the culture, the kind of the idea behind it, like the idea like, what if these people were real? If you take pro wrestling and you just like assume like, oh yeah, these people really do, like they really live these lives, it suddenly becomes very over the top. And with the luchador thing, that's especially true, because they wear the mask and it's all about being very mysterious but virtuous, except for the bad guys who are bad. And so, you know, that's actually a lot of fun. I sort of love it. If it were real, it would be like so much fun. So, you know, Dr. McLuchador, lots of fun. But all of Dr. McNinja is like this, though. He just sort of like hits all these little, just these mindless happy points. Like, for example, his secretary is a gorilla, and so you know, you can imagine why I would love this comic so much. Like, oh, Gordito, he rides a velociraptor. The secretary is a gorilla. There was once a tennis-based doomsday device, and you know, stuff like this. Dr. McNinja is a very fun comic. I keep up with that one quite a lot. XKCD, of course, everybody knows that one. I don't watch this one very often. It's kind of more, what can I say? It's not laugh out loud so much as you just kind of check in on it, and you're just like, oh, that's rather clever. It's more of a sensible chuckle sort of deal, like, ha ha ha, XKCD, when will you're such a card, when will you stop? So yes, XKCD. I used to keep up with more of them. When I was younger, I used to watch even more. I remember way back in the day, 8-Bit Theater. I got into that because on Newgrounds, somebody did a video of 8-Bit Theater's comic. And so after that, I had to go read all of 8-Bit Theater. And that was a Sprite comic. And he did it went on for like 1,000 pages. I'm not sure if it would hold up now if I went back and watched it as an adult. Some of those, you know, you find out they weren't as good going back. But I remember 8-Bit Theater going on for a long time, being pretty popular. It was fairly amusing. You got a lot of that sort of comedy about the whole genre of role-playing games, and that was fun. 8-Bit Theater, though, it's over now. Quit doing it. The guy who did that, Brian Clevenger, I think is what it was. Brian Clevenger. He quit doing it, and I think he tried to move on to some other stuff. You saw some of his comics show up. He might be working professionally in the industry now. But I'm not sure about that. What else is good? That's like old. Looking for Group comic was one that I used to keep up with that I enjoyed quite a bit. Looking for Group was the story about, basically it was like a World of Warcraft team. I mean, it's not really set in World of Warcraft because that would be copyright infringement, but it's kind of like, you can tell it's based on a lot of the elements. And for a while it was actually pretty funny because you had the characters and there was like this elf and he was all wishy-washy. He's like, I'm an elf, I'm one with nature. And they kept trying to explain to him, it's like, no, the elves are bad guys in this setting. And he was like, no, he goes, I'm an elf, I love people, I'm happy. And they were like, no, elves are blood elves now. You're evil, you're on the bad guy team. You're elf is bad. And so they kind of went through that, and it was comedy. They had the warlock was like evil to the point of absurdity, but I kind of lost interest in it about when they started to get really melodramatic. At some point, the writers were like, let's take a really serious turn, and you got a little bit of what TV tropes calls Cerberus syndrome. And Cerberus syndrome is when the comic writers suddenly decide that they want to write drama and not comedy anymore, and so suddenly characters started to like fall in love, but in like kind of unconvincing ways. Like they've been traveling together all this time and they really had nothing in common that you would, I mean, like they were allies in combat, but they weren't like, I love to read about baking. And she'd be like, oh really, I love to read about baking too. Let's talk about baking recipes. And they would just get along on these very mundane human things. It was kind of like they just sort of spontaneously fell in love, almost. It was like, I love you. Let's kiss. Okay. I love you too. And so they started to do that, and then a character died. Like, they just killed one of the main characters, and it was and like, they killed him off screen, too. That was one of the dumbest things. It's like, everybody was talking, and then you just turn, and it was like, oh no, one of our main characters is dead. Like, it was like, what happened? Like, he was fighting armies before. How did he die? Oh, somebody stabbed him when you weren't looking. Oh, okay. And then everyone was all sad about it. I mean, like, there was all this emotion. It's like, oh, no, main character down. Oh, no, what are we going to do? Oh, and they did this for, like, months. And I think they eventually realized, they were like, I don't think our readers really like the melodrama very much. And so they're starting to get back into comedy. But it took them a little while. I think it took them, it was almost like they had to shake off a funk is what it felt like. Because I was kind of watching them and they're sort of like, let's be funny again. And so they would make a joke. And it was like, in light of all the melodrama about death and relationship problems, it was kind of like, joke. And you're like, ugh. This is a little jarring. Are we going to be a miserable sad sack of a comic, or are we going to be funny, guys? Come on. And but I think that they're kind of moving away from the sad sack stuff, and it seems like they want to kind of go back to funny, because funny worked. The sad sack stuff is sad sack. It's hard for people to get really excited to see another sad sack comic. You're just like, we're gonna see that they're gonna be mad at each other tomorrow. It's gonna be updating. So looking for group comic, I used to keep up with it for a while. The early years, that one's a fun one. Later on, like in the middle, it's not so good. It's starting to kind of get to be readable again. But it's sort of like after they jump the shark, it's like Cousin Oliver's already there. And like Cousin Oliver will always be a black mark on looking for group. It's like, like I said, it's like, yeah, I could keep watching it. I mean, like, Cousin Oliver, they realized Cousin Oliver wasn't very popular, and so he's sort of like in the background now, but they still got him there. They have a baby now. They stole a baby. They don't have the baby. They stole a baby. So looking for group. I used to read a comic called Evil Diva Comics, and I recommend this one again from the beginning. This was another one that got hit by Cerberus syndrome. It was a cute little comic about this girl who ran around with a magical wand. And it was a magical girl comic, basically. What it was is she was a devil, but she wasn't a very good devil. She was a demon, is what it was. She wasn't a very good demon, and she went to a school that was like desegregated, demons and angels, and they had to try to get along together. And there was a certain amount of tension there, but it was kind of like it wasn't too bad. But the angels, too, some of them were actually not very pleasant. They were sort of they had this somewhat holier-than-thou attitude, and they kind of condescended to people. And so you got this little bit of dynamic, because you had the demons. Some of them were actually really nasty, but others of them were kind of just like ne'er-do-wells. They weren't like bad people. They were just opportunistic and somewhat villainous. So you had this dynamic, and this little girl gets this wand, and what the wand can do is it can grant wishes, but it's kind of like a monkey's paw in the fact that you have to, it fills a void, basically. If it does something positive, it has to create an equal amount of negativity. So if you wish to, end world hunger, then at the same time it has to, it will end world hunger by, killing everybody, kind of. It never really got that severe. But every time she used it to do something positive, it would cause as much bad stuff to happen in its wake. So it was sort of interesting. You got this little bit of duality sort of going on, where it was like, you know, whether she tried to do good or evil, she wound up with a net neutral. And so, you know, and like I said, the character was supposed to be a demon, so she was kind of grappling even with that within herself. And what happened, though, was that as it was going along, in the early years, it was cute and it was fun, and I liked reading it. But then when it got to the later comics, they have an art shift. And once you see the art shift, just quit reading. Like, that's it. It's done. Because what happened was the original writer and artist actually left the project. And the guys remaining, I guess, that I don't know what they were trying to do. I suspect that they were trying to market to teenage boys, maybe, and they wanted to start selling sex, because suddenly, like, they flip over and there's a time skip, so, like, the main character is, like, in her mid-teens or something like that, and, like, they do, like, a pool party, and then, like, she starts making out with her girlfriends, and, then they, like, there's, like, a pajama party where there's a bunch of people in their underwear, and it just got to be, like, incredibly stupid and just painful to read. It was, like, just drama for its own sake. Like, they do the art shift, and then they have they leap forward in time, but as they leap forward in time, they also have a universe swap, because what it is they wish, like, oh, I wish that we could trade places. They do one of these things. So, like, they do a leap forward in time, and, like, Diva is suddenly, like, really popular. And so I remember everyone just being confused. We're like, oh, we have a time skip, and now, like, Diva's a popular kid. Oh, it's good to see that things turned around for her, I guess. And then, like, but then they started to, like, hint that everything was different, but it wasn't, like, subtle hinting. Like, she just came home, and it was, like, suddenly her mom was, like, really bad at her job, and she was crying because of it. And everyone's like, oh, okay, I guess that in the future her mom loses her stuff. Does she lose her confidence? Was this because of something that happened previously? We never alluded to this. And then they were like, oh, it's because we had a universe shift. Ah, I got you, readers. What a twist. And it was like, oh, you didn't set up that you can't jump forward in time and also swap universes. We weren't even adjusted to the new. You have to tell it, like, you have to work us into the new time period first, then do a universe swap so we can see what's different. Don't start with the universe swap and then swap back and be like, see, now that you're comfortable with the alternate universe, we'll go back to the original one that you have no familiarity with whatsoever. You know, so just stupid choices in writing. Evil Diva just got to be terrible. That, and they started to threaten to put the comic behind a paywall. They were like, donate money. If we don't get $300 per comic, then we won't release it. They started to do that. And so for a little while, people kind of went along with it. And then I think their donations dropped off because people just got, you know, it just got to be like, you're just releasing, like, really not very good comics, and you're refusing to do, like, you're not going to do it. Like, I understand that, you know, like, if you're trying to make a living on the comic and you need to devote a lot of time to it, then obviously you have to kind of set up in your mind. But I mean, like, we do this with the website where we kind of look at things and we're like, well, we need about this much money, and we need to do this, but we'll never, like, never at any point should you ever put that kind of content behind a paywall, because the crucial thing is that you're bringing in fans, and new fans at that. You need, like, more people to come in and see your stuff and then get attached to it and say, like, oh, hey, yeah, I want to keep supporting this. And if they can, because you'll have fans as well that will leave. I mean, like, stuff will come up, maybe they'll lose interest, maybe you know, maybe they have a kid and they need to put more money away, things like that. Like, things happen. So you need to be bringing in new people and seeking a new audience and whatnot. You can't do the paywall thing. You can't threaten to stop doing the comic if people don't pay. It's, you know, you just got to go at it. And they didn't. I don't know. It just got to feel really slimy watching them as they tried to milk the comic for money, and then just pulled a bunch of, like, really stupid gotcha sort of like, oh, it was a bait and switch, you know. Now we're doing lesbian kiss episode. Everybody watch them kiss. They're lesbians now. I'm like, oh, okay. You know, like, and there's swimsuits too, no less. And you're like, this isn't really what I wanted. What happened to the magical girl stuff? Yeah, Evil Diva comics. That was too bad. Quit watching that one. Political comics. As far as comics that people, that a lot of people like, that are good for politics, Scandinavia and the World is a cute one. Scandinavia and the World is actually kind of nice because it's very human, but what it does is it actually personifies the Scandinavian countries and kind of relates them to other countries. And so like Denmark is a little bit conceited. They're like sort of small and a little bit petty and conceited, but handsome though, and happy because he's drunk all the time. And so then you've got like Sweden is kind of uptight and he like combs his hair down and he's like really worried about minorities. And stuff like this. I think it's Iceland? Finland? No, Finland. I always get confused about this one because they don't... Is it Finland? The guy with the hat. There's a guy who runs around with a knife. I'm pretty sure it's Finland. This is Finland. It's because Iceland would be... Yeah, I'm pretty... Okay, Finland. Don't know my Scandinavian countries as well as Kenza does. Every now and then I'm like, who was it again? She's like, yeah, it's Finland. I'm like, oh, okay, Finland. So yeah, so Finland runs around with like a knife and he's just like really weird because the other Scandinavian countries find that Finland is weird. Norway. Everybody loves Norway, but Norway doesn't want to be in the EU. He doesn't... He's also very rich. He's got his oil. And so what it is that the writer for Scandinavia and the World kind of takes like news headlines or sort of cultural stereotypes and just puts them on these little characters and just has them in this very cute kind of engaging way just express the stereotypes or express the news. And when you get right down to it, like a lot of countries, when you look at them from a very detached, like kind of a macroscopic perspective, if you look at them as representing a single person, that single person would be like well-meaning but a bit neurotic. You know, and of course that's because when you have like thousands of different people who all disagree on how to run the country, you make a lot of really wacky decisions for compromise. So it's kind of like they just do, like you just have these little characters and they just do really neurotic things and sort of like they have these bizarre love-hate relationships. Like there's a comic where Russia shows up drunk begging Finland to come back, you know, like I was good to you, come back to me, Finland. And so that one's a cute one, that one's a fun one. And at the end of the comics, like if you don't get it, the author will explain the political stuff that she's talking about, and she might link you to an article or a YouTube video or something like that, and then you get the joke. Like you understand a little bit of background about like, oh, here's this is going on and this is going on. And so even if you look at it and you're like, oh, that's unfair, but then you scroll down and you see like, oh, okay, it's based on this story. And it's not really based, it's not saying anything good or bad about like, you know, whole groups of people. It's just sort of like these are just little news stories that she turns into a joke by personifying the countries that they involve, or by personifying the politicians or whatever, or the politics. So Scandinavia in the World is a cute one. I enjoy that. I say that one's fun. I also kind of like Poland Ball, but Poland Ball is a little bit more biting. But that's because Poland Ball is not really done by any particular person. I remember that when the Ukraine stuff first started to happen, that Russia was actually creating Poland Ball comics that were very pro-Russian, as they were like, oh, Russian Poland Ball comes here to help Ukraine, and you know, I think people kind of didn't buy it. They were like, oh, this is a perversion of Poland Ball. You're not supposed to use Poland Ball to depict your country in a positive manner. All the Poland Ball characters are terrible, unhappy country. Poland Ball is funny because it depicts all the countries as just being like really selfish and like really just crazy and like violent. It kind of, Poland Ball, so Scandinavia in the World kind of takes very human politics, whereas Poland Ball kind of takes more of the like war politics and stuff like that. It takes more like history and stuff like that, and like their fights. So like all the little countries hate each other, and they're just sort of mad. They're all just sort of mad at everyone and think that they're like, I'm the best country. Everyone else is second best country at best. And so it's like that sort of thing. Poland Ball is funny. Less cute than Scandinavia in the World, but I enjoy Scandinavia in the World. I've talked about those two in the past though. Who else do I follow regularly? Trying to think. Group. Oglaf! Ah, yes, Oglaf! Sex humor. Oglaf is very not safe for work. There are so many penises and so much sex and so much stuff going on. But Oglaf is actually very clever because sometimes they, like it's not always sex humor. It's a very adult webcomic, but basically sometimes like the author will just think of like fun things to do that have nothing to do with sex that are just very amusing. And so I really like Oglaf because Oglaf is just very like lighthearted, really like nothing really feels off limits, but it's always just kind of like a lot of fun. I don't know what to say. It feels very clever, and the art is good. It updates once a week every Sunday, And so I kind of keep up with Oglaf on a regular basis. A lot of it too is like role-playing humor, or sometimes they do like erotic role-playing. I remember there was a comic where a bunch of adventurers had to go into like an erotic dungeon, and so they wound up like they were like wearing like normal, you know, like armor and like carrying around bows and stuff like that. And so the gatekeeper stops him and he's like, "Stop! This is an erotic dungeon. You have to be dressed. You have to be erotic if you want to go in here." And they're like, "Oh, what's wrong with us? We're perfectly attractive." And they're like, yeah, you're attractive enough, but you got to wear erotic armor if you're going to be here." So they go back and they come back with the the bikini underwear and like thongs and stuff like that, and like armor that doesn't really protect them very well. And they go through, and as they get deeper and deeper in the dungeon, they get things like eventually one guy's swinging around like a mace attached to his dick, and so like at one point they stop though, and one of the guys is like, "Do you remember a time when we used to wear like normal armor and we would attack with our arms instead of our genitals?" And then they were like, "Don't romanticize those times. That was terrible." Oglaf, yes, always Oglaf is kind of good for a laugh. One that Kenza and I liked a lot was there's one where this girl has a trophy, and what it does is it awards itself to like the person. It's best at sex trophy. And so like this guy's like, "Oh, how do you know you're best at sex?" And she's like, "Well, it's an enchanted trophy. I have sex, and whoever was better at it gets the trophy." And then this guy's like, "Oh, okay, well, I'll challenge you then." And she goes, "All right, you're on." And so they have sex, and the trophy awards itself to the woman. She was the better lover. And so then the guy gets mad, and he storms out, and he's like, "Well, this is just completely dissatisfying sex now that we're..." He's like, and she goes, "Wow, it was for the trophy was for best at sex, not biggest dick." And so like he slams the door, and then she just sits there, and she's got this stupid smile on her face, and she's imagining like she's holding the best at sex trophy in one arm and then best at puns trophy in the other, and that one cracked Kenza up so much. She's like, yes, this is me. I need to be this person one day. So for a while, I believed that this was actually her Facebook profile was the girl with the best at sex. And she's just standing around naked. And I remember her friends were like, "That's from Oglaf, right?" And she was like, "Yes." She goes, "I relate to this comic." And they were like, "Okay." So yeah, Oglaf is a fun one. I talked about unusual webcomics in the past. There are a couple that are unusual. Like I said, I never really kept up with Goblins very much. I just would read it every now and then and keep up somewhat with some of the weird social stuff that went around with Goblins. I think that one finally shut down after some kind of ridiculous meltdown. But that one was always surrounded by weird social stuff. The comic Bumrush Comics. What was it? Red, the one with the girl with no arms. Apparently, like I talked about how that one, it would have been a really good comic if it had focused more on story and a bit less on sort of like cheesecake and like full body spreads. Because the trouble with that comic was it was kind of an interesting premise, but they kept like devoting whole pages to like, look at this full body image of the girl in the bathing suit, and it just slowed the story down so much. It was like, I could be even more attached to the girl if we could get into her personality more, But it turns out that I guess that guy actually just does pornography, because he took a break from that comic for a while and started doing like full-blown porn about like a whorehouse, and it was just sort of like people were having sex on the flimsiest of premises, and I was like, oh, okay. So I guess that's where I didn't realize that he did that originally. Like when I was just like looking at the comic, I was like, yeah, there's lots of cheesecake in this comic, and then I started he quit doing that. He started doing like full-blown porn, and I was like, oh. That's why there's so much cheesecake in this comic, because the guy has traditionally done porn in the past, so it was like he was trying to leave his porn roots and then went back to porn. So I think he quit doing the porn, and he's gone back to the comic, but he sort of lost me when he started doing porn, because I was like, no, I was kind of interested in the premise of Red, and then, now we're doing like porn. So, yeah, it's too bad. Like I said, I talked a bit about Stanford Webcomics experience. That's still going. After I did that video about the Stanford Webcomics experiment, he ranted. The thing about that is I can't tell what of that would be parody and what of that would not be parody. Like I responded and I was like, "Oh no, please forgive me." And he was like, he goes, "I can never forgive you. We are mortal enemies now, for you are a critic and I am an artist." And so like I would have continued engaging with that. But there's always that thing where you stop and you say, "Yeah, this is all like fun and stuff, but what if he's actually crazy?" and you know, you get that kind of thing. I don't think he's actually crazy, but he could be actually crazy. And so I pursued it just a little bit, and then I was like, oh, okay, you know, I'll leave it be. On the off chance that maybe he's like really serious, because you never know on the internet. Like, you might find that like somebody, you're like, oh, this can't be serious, this can't be real, and then you find out like, oh God, it really is, it's very serious. Yeah. So potentially, I mean, if he's doing parody, I commend the commitment to it, and if he's doing satire, like I said, I commend him if it's satire. If it's not satire, then you know, have at whatever. Stanford Webcomics experiment is still kind of interesting. It's an interesting webcomic experiment. Anyway, that one's just bizarre, surreal. I talked about that though in the unusual webcomic thing. What else is good? Dash Academy, if you're a fan of ponies. Dash Academy started off, and actually it was sort of average. Like, the art was decent, and the writing was decent, but it's gone along and it's gotten to be pretty cute. It now features horse lesbians, which I think is one of the more amusing types of lesbians. If you're going to have lesbians in a story, horse lesbians ranks up there as sort of an amusing thing, in my opinion. It comes up quite a lot in My Little Pony, but it never ceases to make me smile a little bit. Just horse lesbians. Oh, it's so cute. Horse lesbians. Oh, they're so adorable. They hold hooves, and they like make great big pony eyes at each other. Oh, so adorable. And yes, Gilda's like banging the football player guy, I guess. Gilda is not a lesbian. Too bad for women everywhere. I mean, they're just missing out on their Gilda. But that one's actually been a fun comic to follow. It doesn't update very frequently. I think that guy's too busy for that sort of thing. But fun. I used to keep up, also speaking of ponies, I used to keep up with Mad Max a lot. And actually I'm just a little bit, I don't know Mad Max personally, but I'm a little worried. I think Mad Max is female. I'm a little worried about them. I think that they wound up losing their home. They ran into some financial trouble. Because they were like, well, I'm entertaining a new nomadic lifestyle, and I'd love to get back to art as soon as I'm stable, but I don't know when that will be. And then they kind of dropped off the face of the earth. So I kind of worry about them. But they used to do a lot of really clever, kind of amusing, just very clever, amusing comics. I used to keep up with them all the time. So they've been missing for months now, missing from the internet. So hopefully they're doing okay. I don't know what's going on with them, but they were good artists, funny artists, very, very clever. So, well, what else? What else have I kept up with? Which on a real regular basis, or anything that I've dropped off on? No, I can't think of anything else off the top of my head. So I think that's it. Webcomics. I don't know. It's a fun deal. I used to read Bob the Angry Flower, but the trouble was, like, Bob the Angry Flower. Bob the Angry Flower did politics, but his comedy was very esoteric. You know, like, he would kind of make jokes about stuff that he saw, and a lot of times, like, if you didn't watch this movie, or if you weren't, like, privy to his particular interests, then you sometimes wouldn't get the joke. So that was one problem with Bob the Angry Flower. It was also, Bob the Angry Flower was also like a newspaper comic. So it kind of like, I don't know, Bob the Angry Flower. I don't have a lot of thoughts on Bob the Angry Flower. But that's one that I used to keep up with. But a few others. But none that I really have any specific comments on, I suppose. If anything, because they were just like fun to read, but I quit reading them because they were kind of like, they were sort of average, very formulaic, and I got sort of, and I just got tired of the formula, I suppose. But anyway, I guess that's it. Those are comics that I read, comics that I recommend, even if they kind of teetered off into being too melodramatic or too silly at the end. Those were comics that I enjoy, and I do recommend them for at least some section of when they were good. But otherwise, I suppose that's it. I will catch you guys later.